A simple woman stepped onto the diamond in canvas sneakers and a thrift store bat. But by the time her swing echoed through the stadium, the entire elite forgot her name but not her power. Where are you watching from? Because this story doesn't begin with applause or glory. It begins with a woman standing alone in a world that had already decided she was invisible. The Spring Invitational at Rosebridge Park was no ordinary tournament. It was the coliseum of curated success, a playground for women born into old money and new fame, where every swing was sponsored, every cleat embossed with gold initials, and even the dugouts were velvet-lined. It was a place where appearances weren't just admired, they were mandatory. And then came Claire Wren. She stepped onto the field like a misprint in a designer catalog, white cotton tee, gray joggers, and shoes that had seen too many Ohio winters. Her ponytail was practical, not styled. Her bat looked like it had survived generations of backyard games, and maybe it had. It still bore a faded discount tag, the ink half washed away by time. From the grandstand, someone whispered, "Who let the staff borrow gear?" A second voice, sharper, followed. "She's here to chase foul balls, not hit them." The laughter wasn't loud, not yet, but it spread like perfume in humid air, cloying and hard to ignore. Claire didn't move. She didn't smile or cower. Her hazel eyes swept the field, then fixed on nothing at all. She wasn't there for them, not their eyes, not their jokes, but they weren't finished. Lauren Holt, a semi-pro darling in a Prada uniform, leaned against the dugout and offered her venom like champagne. "This is a baseball tournament," she said, "not a public fitness class." Someone in a gold-trimmed Under Armour kit added, "Kids camp is out back." More laughter, more eyes. Claire didn't react. She stood on the dirt like she belonged there, like the field had always known her, and perhaps it had. In another life, Julian Wren. Wait. High in the VIP pavilion, watched silently. His suit was gray and unassuming. His gaze was not. He didn't blink. He didn't wave. He just watched. And Claire knew, down on the field, the mockery escalated. It grew teeth. Whitney Crane made her entrance. Manhattan royalty, media heiress, queen of Rosebridge. She smelled like Wacth and jasmine. The latter a scent Julian hated. She stood before Claire with a practiced smile and a voice designed to wound. "That bat," she said, "looks like it came from a thrift shop." Claire gripped it tighter, not in defense, in memory. Every crack, every scratch, she knew them. She'd earned them. The crowd howled. Players whispered. Staff members leaned into the drama. Margaret Voss, a senior tournament official with the posture of a former ballerina, stepped forward. "Miss, the field is for registered players only," she said, her finger pointing toward the gate. "Polite but absolute," someone shouted. "Probably here to film a fake girl power video." Claire stayed still. Her silence screamed louder than their insults. Then Whitney raised the stakes. 3 strikeouts, she declared. "And you kneel. Say you don't deserve to be here. Say it to the cameras." Claire tilted her head. "And if I hit the first home run of the tournament," Whitney laughed. "Certain this was performance art. Then what?" Claire's voice was a scalpel. "Then you take off your jersey and leave the field." Now, the silence after that was the kind that burns, the kind that signals something ancient in the air has shifted. A deal was made. And the crowd, rich in arrogance, leaned forward, not because they believed Claire, but because they couldn't wait to watch her fall. They didn't see how her foot anchored gently into the clay, how her fingers found familiar grooves on the bat. They didn't notice the way she exhaled, not in fear, but in focus. They didn't ask who she was, because they thought they already knew, but they didn't. They had no idea. And soon, it would be too late to unsee her. The moment Claire stepped into the batter's box, the air shifted, not because anyone expected greatness, but because every camera had turned its lens toward humiliation. She was the sacrificial scene, the comic relief in an otherwise calculated display of athletic privilege. On the mound, Whitney Crane tightened her grip on the ball like it owed her something. Her nails, manicured and painted the same metallic blue as her team's sponsor, dug lightly into the seams. Across the field, players whispered like gossiping courtiers, their mockery hidden behind smirks and reflective sunglasses. Claire stood still, her weight balanced, her eyes fixed not on Whitney, not on the pitch, but somewhere deeper, as if she saw beyond the crowd, beyond the fence, maybe back to a cracked sidewalk in Ohio, where a younger version of herself had learned to swing against shadows. The umpire called time, then signaled play. The first pitch came fast, a cutter designed to impress, to intimidate. Whitney was a practiced athlete, not just a socialite with money. Her pitching mechanics were trained by Olympians, her grip adjusted by sports scientists. The ball hissed through the air. Claire didn't swing. The sound of it slapping into the catcher's glove drew applause from the dugout. Strike one. The umpire barked. Claire blinked once. No flinch, no regret. She rotated her shoulder slowly, the way she always did to reset tension. Someone in the stands shouted. Too scared to swing, another chimed in. Should have stuck to Little League. But Claire had heard worse. At 19, she was denied entry to a minor league tryout because she wore sneakers, not cleats. At 21, she spent nights cleaning baseball gyms just to use their nets after hours. No one had ever cheered for her. Not really. Pitch 2 came harder, a low slider meant to pull her off balance. Claire shifted, followed the ball with her eyes, but let it pass. The crowd murmured. Not another called strike, but a ball. The umpire held up his hand. 1-1. Some laughed. She doesn't even know how to play. A semi-pro muttered, but her silence was not ignorance. It was calculation. She wasn't here to prove herself on their terms. She wasn't here for them at all. Far above, Julian Wren remained a statue behind the glass, but those near him could feel the energy. He wasn't watching like a man concerned. He was watching like a man waiting. Pitch 3 came. This time, Claire swung, not out of panic, not out of fear. The motion was clean, a fluid release of tension that ended in a crack, unmistakable sound of wood meeting leather with intent. The ball screamed foul down the third baseline, striking the concrete just feet from a security guard who flinched and dropped his clipboard. The crowd gasped. Someone muttered, "Lucky hit." Whitney narrowed her eyes. Her laugh was tighter now, her posture more rigid. Claire rolled her wrist once, calmly. 1-2. Tension swirled not from her, but around her. Pitch 4. A fastball. High. Claire ignored it. Ball 2. The caster stood and whispered something into Whitney's ear. They were adjusting now, recalculating. The narrative was beginning to slip. Pitch 5. A sinker. Claire started to swing, then stopped mid-motion, her bat cutting the air without contact. Ball 3. The umpire declared, full count. Tension rippled across the field like static. Claire adjusted her grip. The whispers had changed tone. What if she hits it? Someone whispered near the first baseline. No way. Another snapped. Her bat's from a garage sale. Pitch 6 came like a challenge, clean, straight, fast. Claire swung, and the ball disappeared. It rose fast and high, a white blur against the soft blue sky, lifting beyond the outfield, beyond the fence, beyond even the last row of the grandstand. It landed hard against a corporate banner, tearing through fabric, and vanished into the private garden beyond the wall. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Drones froze, mouths hung open. Even the umpire hesitated before lifting his arm. Home run, he said, and then, quietly, again, home run. Claire lowered her bat, not triumphantly, but gently, reverently. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't shout. She stepped away from the plate like someone leaving church. The only sound was the soft thud of her sneakers on the dirt. But above, in the VIP suite, Julian Wren smiled. It was not smug. It was not surprise. It was the smile of a man who knew the story was about to begin. The scoreboard flickered. The first run of the tournament. A single name, Claire Wren. Confusion rippled. A staff member fumbled with a headset. A team manager scrambled toward the umpire. Whitney Crane stood motionless on the mound, her glove dangling useless at her side. The audience broke into fragmented chatter. Who is she? Where did she come from? Was that legal? And then something changed. A single clap, then another. Hesitant, confused, but real. Applause spread like fire in a dry field, not because they wanted to cheer her, but because they couldn't help it. The sound of that swing had done something to them, broken something open. Claire walked back to the dugout. No one reached to high-five her. She didn't expect them to, but one of the youngest players, a rookie barely 20, stepped aside to let her pass. Eyes wide, respect etched across her face. Claire nodded once. Not thanks. Recognition. Back in the VIP lounge, Julian turned to an assistant and gave a brief order. The assistant disappeared. Moments later, a large screen near the stadium entrance lit up with footage, old clips, grainy at first, showing Claire coaching kids on community fields, swinging alone under streetlights, practicing in empty school gyms. A low voice narrated, she gave others a dream before claiming one of her own. Spectators turned, staring. Seeing her life unfold in pixels, the footage was raw, real. Not a campaign, not a brand, a truth too quiet to deny. Down on the field, Whitney Crane finally stepped back, her lips pressed tight, her eyes glassy, a slow, stunned shuffle toward the dugout. Her team didn't meet her gaze. Their champion had been unmade by a woman they thought was nothing. Claire sat quietly on the bench, her bat resting against her leg. A small child in the front row waved. She looked up, and for the first time that day, smiled. Not because she had won, but because someone saw her not as a joke, or a threat, or a stranger, just as Claire, a simple woman with a swing that broke the silence. And somewhere beneath the grandstand, the foundation began to tremble. The story was no longer theirs. It was hers now, and she hadn't even spoken yet. The ball was still soaring in their minds when the real twist landed. It didn't come with a roar. It came with the quiet precision of a man in a tailored gray suit stepping out of glass and into history. Julian Wren descended from the VIP pavilion with the calm of a storm gathering its force. Not in wind or thunder, but in absolute certainty. The crowd shifted like water, finding the pull of gravity. No one knew yet what his presence meant, but they felt it. Players stopped mid-warm-up. Staffers stepped aside without being told. The elite who moments ago jeered now straightened their postures, adjusting their expensive watches, flicking invisible dust from their sleeves. Julian's shoes tapped against the concrete path like a metronome ticking toward consequence. Claire had returned to the dugout, sitting with her hands folded over her bat, her face unreadable. Her smile from moments ago had faded not into fear, but into focus. She knew this part of the game wasn't played on dirt. Julian walked past the stunned officials, past Whitney Crane frozen mid-step beside the mound, and onto the field with the confidence of someone who did not need to announce who he was. Yet he did, not with his voice, but with a gesture. He walked directly to Claire, placed one hand lightly on her shoulder, and kissed the crown of her head. The stadium inhaled and never exhaled. Silence curled around the bleachers like smoke, thick and electric. Julian turned to the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I told you, he said, eyes scanning the rows. One swing is all it takes. And then, turning back to Whitney, you just mocked the heart of this tournament and my wife. The word landed like a hammer. Wife. The crowd flinched. Cameras zoomed in with desperate urgency. Social media feeds exploded in real time. Someone dropped a phone. Someone else gasped audibly. The players who had been laughing minutes before now stood statue still, their sapphire wristbands gleaming in guilt. Whitney's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her confidence collapsed inward. She looked down at her branded jersey like it might suddenly disappear. Julian took a step toward her. From now on, he said, your name will not appear in any event sponsored by my organization, and anyone who supported today's display of classism and cruelty will be treated the same. He lifted a sleek black tablet, tapped a button, And the stadium's big screen came alive again. A list began to scroll, names of sponsors, player profiles, staff credentials, all marked in red, each with a single word beside it: terminated. Gasps turned to murmurs, murmurs turned to panic. Some staff tried to explain themselves, others simply turned and walked off the field, their careers dissolving into pixels. Claire remained still, her hands never left her bat. Her presence had become a gravitational force, even without speaking. She commanded the story. Julian's voice remained steady. This tournament was founded on fairness. He said, Claire didn't just fund half its endowment, she shaped its mission, trained its first volunteers, and helped build its very field. And yet, you mocked her. The weight of the truth was heavier than any insult they had thrown her way. Emily Tate, the field coordinator who had smugly told Claire to leave, now stood with eyes glassy and posture trembling. Behind her, Richard Tate, the senior official who had questioned Claire's attire, tried to step back into the crowd. Julian turned toward them without missing a beat. Your careers as gatekeepers of exclusion are over, he said. As of now, your access is revoked. You are no longer part of Rosebridge in any capacity. The crowd buzzed, shifting, trying to recalibrate. Claire stood. Finally, she stepped forward and took Julian's hand, not to hold on to something, but to steady the moment. The cameras caught the quiet grace of it. Her plain white shirt now looked like armor. Her second hand bat a sword. I didn't come here to prove anything, Claire said softly. And somehow, everyone heard. I came to play, but you asked for a swing. So I gave you one. A tremor passed through the grandstands. Applause broke out, not from those who had mocked her, but from those who realized too late that they had witnessed not just a swing, but a correction, a reckoning. Whitney Crane lowered her gaze, her mouth open, then shut again. She took one slow, reluctant step forward, then another, and then she did what no one expected. She removed her jersey, slowly, deliberately, folding it over her arm. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wren, she said, her voice cracking. Julian didn't acknowledge the apology. Claire nodded once, her expression unreadable. It was not forgiveness, it was closure. Brand representatives began to approach, their once proud logos now clumsy apologies. Endorsement offers were whispered behind trembling hands. Claire looked at them, all of them, and said nothing. The real answer was in her walk as she left the field. Not triumphant, not angry, just grounded. The scoreboard above still read one name, Claire Wren, the first and only run of the day. And behind her, the empire built on exclusivity crumbled. Lauren Holt was disqualified before she even picked up her bat. Her Prada contract dissolved overnight. The tech influencers deleted posts in bulk, their platforms suddenly radioactive. Emily and Richard Tate were escorted out of the facility. The gold pins they wore were stripped like false honors. Behind them, junior staff whispered in fear, worried who would be next. Julian stayed behind only long enough to speak to the tournament director. The selection process is void, he said, voice calm but absolute. Every rule you wrote that allowed today's humiliation is canceled. From this point forward, we play by heart, not hierarchy. He tapped his tablet once more. Phones vibrated across the complex. Notifications, revoked credentials, canceled contracts. Players stared at their screens like war had been declared on their privilege. Claire's second swing hadn't even happened. She didn't need it. The truth was already louder than the bat. As she and Julian walked off the field, the stadium didn't erupt. It bowed, bowed in silence, bowed in reverence, bowed because it had no other language for what had just happened. And behind her, in the place where cruelty had once reigned, all that remained was dust. Her bat, her swing, her silence had become by scripture. And the world would never look at a thrift store weapon the same way again. It wasn't the silence after the swing that changed Rosebridge, it was what came next. The fallout wasn't a single moment of collapse, but a slow unraveling of a world that had believed itself untouchable. Claire Wren didn't return to the bench after Julian led her off the field. She didn't return to the field either. She walked through the private exit behind the pavilion, past shocked staffers who could no longer meet her eyes, past players once full of snide comments who now stood like statues, afraid to speak. Some tried to nod politely as if it were all a misunderstanding, but she gave no reaction. Her bat rested across her shoulder, the same worn grip brushing the edge of her collarbone, as if reminding her you already did what you came here to do. Outside, in the breezeway lined with marble and digital billboards, once flashing player stats, Claire sat alone on a wooden bench with chipped paint, not part of the show, not curated for a camera, just Claire, a woman who had spent most of her life moving through doors no one opened for her, across the courtyard. A small group of teenage girls hovered near the railing, clutching cheap programs and wearing knockoff jerseys. They whispered to each other, unsure whether to approach. Claire caught their eyes, smiled gently, and gestured them over. At first, they hesitated, but then one stepped forward, a girl in thick glasses and oversized jeans who said, "Can I touch the bat?" Claire passed it to her like a relic. The girl ran her fingers over the faded wood, over the scratch marks and chipped paint. "This," she whispered, "is the coolest thing I've ever seen." The moment it wasn't broadcast. It wasn't shared, but it was real. And maybe that was the point. Back inside, chaos had a different shape. The Rosebridge boardroom, usually a sanctuary of cold confidence and quiet deals, was now tense with panic. Senior officials scrambled to revise statements, draft apologies, and calculate losses. Contracts were dissolving faster than they could be printed. Sponsorships were pulling out, not because they disagreed with Claire, but because they'd been on the wrong side of the story. The narrative had flipped, and the internet had chosen its champion. Millions of views, millions of comments, most asking one question: who is Claire Wren? But the people inside the tournament had no idea how to answer. She hadn't promoted herself. She had no viral presence, no curated Instagram. Her swing had spoken, and they had no translator. In the locker room, players sat silently. The pride in their limited edition gear now felt like a uniform of shame. Lauren Holt, stripped of her captain title, stared at the floor. Her cleats, once shined to a mirror polish, were caked with dust. "I didn't even ask her name," she muttered. Her teammates said nothing. It was Emily Tate who spoke first. Not in defense of herself, but in disbelief. "We all saw her and just decided." No one responded, because they all knew. They hadn't just laughed, they had agreed. In the stands, fans who had once applauded the spectacle now looked at each other with unease. Some left early, unwilling to face the discomfort of witnessing their complicity. Others stayed, not out of loyalty to the tournament, but because they wanted to see what would happen next. The field itself had become a symbol of exposure, of reckoning, of something bigger than sport. And in that void, Claire's absence only made her presence louder. Meanwhile, in a modest hotel room 10 minutes from Rosebridge, Julian and Claire sat side by side. He had opened the window, letting the sounds of distant traffic and rustling trees fill the silence. She held a cup of tea, fingers curled around the ceramic, staring into the steam. "They won't stop talking," she said. "Good," Julian replied. "They should talk." She shook her head slowly. "Not about me, about what matters. You are what matters," he said. "Not because of your swing, because of what you refuse to apologize for." She didn't answer, not right away. Her mind wasn't on the swing, or the cheers, or even the public apologies now flooding her inbox. It was on a moment 8 years earlier, when she had been told she didn't belong in a coaching program because she didn't have a college degree. She'd stood outside in the rain that day, holding the same bat, trying not to cry. The institution hadn't cared about her skill then, but now it had no choice but to look her in the eye. "I never wanted to humiliate them," she said finally. Julian placed his hand over hers. "You didn't. They did that to themselves. All you did was swing." She thought of Whitney Crane, her apology, her folded jersey. She didn't hate her, not even a little, but she also didn't forgive her. Not because of pride, but because forgiveness wasn't owed. Not yet, maybe not ever. Elsewhere, the aftermath continued. Sports networks ran segments analyzing her swing frame by frame. Biomechanics experts called it pure muscle memory, forged in raw experience. One retired pro said, "I don't care where her bat came from. That's talent money can't fake." Influencers posted videos praising her resilience. Even those who had mocked her hours before. They tried to switch sides without looking like traitors. But audiences weren't fooled. The public was no longer interested in perfection. They wanted truth. Claire had given them that without saying a word. And that was what scared the system most. Not her bat, not her background, but her truth. That a woman in thrift store clothes and borrowed courage could dismantle an empire with a swing. The morning after, Claire walked back onto the field. It was empty. The stands were quiet. The sky was soft and silver. She stepped to home plate, her sneakers pressing into the dirt, and stared out into the outfield. She didn't hold the bat this time. She didn't need to. The field remembered, every inch of it, and somewhere, behind the quiet, the story waited, not for a sequel, not for fame, just for the next girl who might step up to the plate, clutching a hand-me-down bat, wondering if she belongs, and if she listens closely, she'll hear the echo, not just of a home run, but of Claire Wren, whispering without words you already do, in the days that followed. The stadium where Claire Wren had made her silent statement became more than a sports venue. It became a site of transformation. The Rosebridge Invitational, once at a shrine to exclusivity, saw its own banners stripped down, replaced not by new sponsors, but by silence, reflection, and slow reform. Claire did not return to the field in front of cameras again. She didn't need to. What she had done wasn't a performance, it was a reset, but across the country, and then across the world. Her name traveled further than she ever had, not just as a home run hitter, not even as Julian Wren's wife, but as a symbol of reclamation. An ordinary woman who became a mirror, not for greatness, but for truth. On the third day, Claire received a letter, not an email, not a press request, a handwritten letter from a high school softball coach in Detroit who said her players had watched the replay of her home run 57 times. He wrote, "They don't talk about the bat, they talk about the pause before the swing, about how you didn't blink, about how you looked like you'd already won before the ball even left the pitcher's hand." Claire folded the letter quietly, placed it in a shoebox beside her bed, along with other letters, photos, sketches, notes from young girls who didn't want autographs, but advice. She didn't reply with public statements. She called when she could, met with them when she was nearby. She offered no speeches, only questions. How's your swing? Are you having fun? Are you playing your game? Or theirs, the media tried to keep the drama alive. They asked Julian for press conferences. They pitched book deals, reality shows, speaking tours. He refused them all. When they asked Claire, she simply said, "I'm not a message. I'm a person." On the fifth day, the Rosebridge board formally dissolved the old selection committee. In its place, a rotating council made up of coaches, community organizers, and players was announced. The first new invitee to the next spring invitational, an 18-year-old from New Mexico who trained on dirt fields and shared bats with her siblings. She had written Claire a letter. 2. Said her cleats had holes. Said her team played under broken lights. Claire sent her a new set of lights, anonymously, with a note that read, "Make your own stadium." And yet, beyond the public reckoning, beyond the systemic overhauls and glossy headlines, something more intimate had shifted. Claire's relationship with her own past had begun to heal. On the seventh evening, she returned alone to the community park where she had taught hundreds of children how to field ground balls using tennis balls and borrowed gloves, the same park where she had trained under broken light posts. Her only audience, the hum of street lamps and the occasional stray cat. She walked along the fence, past the rusted scoreboard, to the equipment shed still marked with peeling paint. Inside, she found the same cracked bucket of practice balls, the netted cage she had sewn together one summer using fishing line, and the wall of names kids who had made their first hits there, marked in permanent marker on wooden planks. She added a name in small, cursive Grace E. First base. 2021, a girl who once said, Coach Claire, I'm not fast, but I'm brave. And Claire knew then legacy wasn't about who remembers your name. It was about who remembers what you gave them. Julian found her there just after sunset. He didn't ask why she came. He just sat beside her on the low bleachers and handed her a thermos of coffee. They didn't speak for a while. It was the kind of silence only two people who had survived something unspoken could share. Finally, he said, they're naming a scholarship after you. She exhaled softly. That wasn't the plan. No, he said. But it was the result. I only swung the bat. She replied. Julian turned to her. Serious. No, you held your ground. That's harder. On the 9th day, Whitney Crane held her own press conference, not at Rosebridge, but from a quiet gallery in Brooklyn. Her voice trembled. She admitted to her prejudice. She resigned from her media role, stating, I believed winning meant owning the spotlight. Claire showed me it's about protecting those the light never touches. When the clip aired, Claire watched it in silence, then turned off the TV and went for a run. Some things you don't need to answer. You just need to keep moving forward. On the 10th day, the bat was placed in a display case at the Baseball Heritage Hall in Chicago. Not because it was famous, but because it was real. The curator called it the swing that opened the doors. Beside it sat Claire's sneakers, frayed and faded, placed not on a pedestal but at ground level, where children could reach out and touch them. And yet, Claire never visited the display. She didn't need to. She still had the shoes she wore that day, different ones, but worn the same. She kept them by her door. Always dusty, always ready, because the world had changed. Yes, but not completely, and not forever. The systems that crumble often find ways to rebuild themselves unless people keep showing up, keep swinging. On the 11th day, a college offered Claire an honorary doctorate in human rights through sport. She declined. Instead, she asked if they'd fund a new community league for girls who couldn't afford uniforms. They said yes. And so, by the 12th day, the story of Claire Wren had stopped being about Claire at all. It had become a ripple, a chain of smaller stories. Thousands of them, many without cameras or applause. But that's how revolutions live, not in volume, but in velocity, not in noise, but in direction. On the 13th day, Claire walked through a nearby market in anonymity. A vendor called out to her, unaware of who she was. Hey, miss, we've got brand new bats on discount. She smiled, approached, picked one up, felt the weight. It was too clean, too smooth. She set it down gently. I'm more of a second-hand type, she said. The vendor laughed. They always swing better after they've been through something. Right? Claire looked at me, and for the first time in days, truly laughed. And that was it. Not a climax, not a finale. Just a quiet reminder that some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with movement, with continuation, with a woman walking home, carrying nothing but calluses, memory, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes a simple swing is enough to shake the world, and sometimes a simple woman is the only one brave enough to take it.